Well, Tom Cruise may have to wear shades, but I don't. This is Dr. Greg Parsons, and it's week 5 for DBA760. So we're past the halfway point, and I thought it was time to change up the music a little bit and the picture. But we'll also be changing the content of the class. We're going to be going into the resource-based theories of J. Barney. So this week's readings are going to be based upon J. Barney's work and others in the field of what are come to call resource-based theories, strategic management. And again, we'll see how this is a continued evolution of the thinking in the field. We've kind of worked our way through Michael Porter's work and the people who wrote about him. And J. Barney was definitely influenced by Porter, but saw that there were some things that could be added, and this also kind of relates to the swinging of the pendulum that we talked about in the very first week of class, how things kind of go back and forth. And now where Porter looked at the external factors, Barney starts to go back and look at the internal factors. So we have a number of readings, some by J. Barney, some about the work of J. Barney. So obviously and it continues to be an influential researcher in this particular area. We have assignment for discussion, and as you might expect, we'll be talking about how the resource-based theories fit into the advancements in the field of strategic management. And the paper will try to look at the past 2 weeks, comparing and contrasting Porter and Barney, and also the views of their work and the theories that kind of these led up to. So we want to start including more information now that you've got your feet wet in this field, and you know a little bit about Mintzberg, you know a little bit about Porter, now you're going to know a little bit about Barney. Now you kind of have a feel for the field itself and how what we now call strategic management has evolved from earlier stage where it was mainly considered business policy to now where we have analytical frameworks and a multitude of different approaches that can be used to investigate strategic management. So use previous work from previous weeks. You can use articles, you can use things, add to it, of course, because we want to keep expanding our view, but the idea is we want to dig into these theories, dig into these streams of literature, and that was kind of the basis of my question posted in the discussion post last week of sort of what do you think a stream of literature is? So to answer that, and to talk about a little bit more, streams of literature are basically all the published material about a particular subject. These could be papers from journal articles, they could be books, they could be speeches, they could be things from conferences, monographs, working papers, all about a particular subject. Generally, the subject that we're interested in will be based on well-accepted theory. At this stage, you and we are not in the position of trying to invent a whole new field all on our own. That may be your calling in the future, but right now, all we're trying to do is take an existing theory, existing body of work, and find a way that we might make our minor contribution to it. In terms of how the literature, a stream of literature is evaluated, things that come from journals, top-notch journals, peer-reviewed top-notch journals are considered the gold standard because they are peer-reviewed. They are going through a higher level of inspection. For example, if you were in the medical field and you got something published in the New England Journal of Medicine, that would be a much higher accolade, considered much more significant than publishing in a regional journal or a non-peer-reviewed journal. So there's all different levels of quality in terms of the journals themselves, how well they're respected in the field. And then when we move out of peer-reviewed, and we talk about maybe online journals that are not peer-reviewed or blogs or people's opinions, which you can find lots of. There's no shortage of information with access to the internet. It's just they don't have any validity or less validity. Maybe a great idea. It's just how do you know it's true or not? And it's also important because as you think dissertation-wise, a literature review generally makes up a large part of the dissertation. The final content of Chapter 2 is a literature review, and you want to be able to stay within a stream of literature. Okay, so how big is it going to be? Well, it's going to depend upon what you choose, but regardless, you're going to be choosing a stream of literature that has substantial academic credentiality, that it's been published in a lot of places, has a lot of people who've worked in the field, a lot of opinions about it, and your job as the researcher is to kind of follow that stream. What could be the subject? Well, anything really. You could have the universe and everything that's been written about it as your subject, but that would be sort of impractical to decide to work in that area. Even if you're an astrophysicist, you generally pick one aspect of the universe that you want to work with. For example, some people might think that leadership would be a good stream of literature because, well, it's well known. There's obviously a lot of literature written about the subject. There are journals out there that write exclusively about it. However, by itself, it's so broad that once you started digging below the surface, you'd find that leadership had many different definitions and many different theories associated with it, and trying to explore them all would just kind of lead you running, chasing your own tail, trying to come up with something that you could work with. So we try to avoid getting into something that's way too broad, that we call the ocean of literature, to kind of focus in on something that's actually can be clearly defined, narrowly focused, and end up with, interesting research questions. But also, you can't choose subjects that have no background in the field. Social media, for example, is a relatively new phenomenon and changing constantly, and you might think would be a very interesting subject to explore. But when you get into the literature and start looking at what's been written, there's really not enough there, and there's not a lot of theory behind it, or it's not tied to existing theory outside of a technology, how does it work sort of factor. I'm sure it will, if it continues to be a large social phenomenon, as it has been. People are probably writing about it now. However, the publishing cycle means that things that have been written a year or two ago may not even have reached the journals yet. And so if you're waiting for peer-reviewed journal articles to establish the consensus in the field and people responding to other people's ideas, it's just too new. Like I say, it will probably come to fruition as a field of study, but right now it's not well enough established. So how do these theories develop? How do we actually see the stream evolve? So this is on a slightly different subject matter, but suppose that you were looking at management theory. That's what your field you're interested in. However, we know that would be way too broad, because Frederick Taylor is sometimes mentioned as the originator of management theory, at least the way we think of it now, and in terms of writing and establishing theories about it, and that was back in the 1800s, and clearly there's been a lot of work done since that time. So after Taylor, Fayol was writing about it in Europe. Max Weber was writing about bureaucracy and organizations in Germany. Mary Parker Follett was instituted and worked with the human relations theory of management. Elton Mayo and the Hawthorne experiments looked at the effect of social interaction on productivity. Abram Maslow introduced the idea of motivation and his needs hierarchy into the field of management. George Miller introduced systems theories. Kenneth Boulding also worked in that area. Herb Simon was in that area, and Paul Lawrence and Jay Lorish contributed contingency theory to management theories. And this just brings us up kind of through the 1970s and 80s, and there's obviously been a lot more done to that. So clearly, this is the Mississippi River of theories and literature. There's too much here, and what you would need to do is focus in on some aspect of this. So let's see how that happens. Suppose you were interested in management theory, but you wanted to look at it from a motivational standpoint. You decided to start with Maslow. So he started tracing theories theories and writings that related to Maslow. And you might find that Alderfer's ERG theory was a adaptation of Maslow's needs hierarchy and added some additional ideas to that. And then we find other authors in the field who contributed. Douglas McGregor was the author of the Theory X and Theory Y. So you see how not only do you have a main body of literature, but you have all the intersecting tributaries that contribute to it. And maybe another way to look at it is as a tree of literature. So, for example, if you were interested in contingency theories and management, well, you'd find that contingency theories were developed upon the foundations of classical management theories and human relations theories and systems theories. These were kind of the roots in a chronological order, but contingency theory drew out of all of these, came up with new ideas, but that certainly wasn't the end, because based on contingency theory we found additional theories such as the SWOT analysis theory, organizational culture and how that affects managerial effectiveness, business leadership theories, which said leadership is somewhat different than management, and so we evolved an area of theory related to leadership, game theory and strategy, more kind of mathematical orientation towards management decision making. Now we're interested in global management and the effects of international cultures. Stakeholder theory also came out of contingency theories. So in the same light as the river, we could pick one of these branches and say, well, what happens then? I mean, can you just work with stakeholder theory? Well, it may be a starting point, and you may find that the originator of stakeholder theory is generally considered to be R. Edward Freeman and the writings he did, and Charles Blattberg was kind of his nemesis, or his naysayer, that said stakeholder theory doesn't really explain anything that we can't already explain, and so they form kind of the basis. But stakeholder theory became important in literature as a theory of management and who management needs to respond to, and so you'll find different authors over the last 30 years have all contributed significantly to it. And so you can trace not only a stream of literature, but a tree of literature, and find all different ways that these different articles and authors have contributed to a better understanding of the field. Why is that important? Because that's how you break it down. That's how you go from a very general understanding to a very specific understanding. Another way to look at it perhaps is if you went into a major university and looked at their different, might call them schools or colleges, you'd find it kind of broken down into areas of knowledge. So if you were interested in business, that would generally fall into the area of social sciences, along with psychology and sociology. And within business, if you went to the business college, you'd walk down the hallways and see that there were departments for marketing and finance and accounting, and many times a general management department, and there would be faculty within these departments that would be specialists in this area. But even within the management department, for example, you'd find that there were faculty that were specialists and experts in organizational behavior, and others that were experts in strategic management or experts in leadership. So as faculty and wanting to publish in a particular area and become expert in a particular area, you have to focus. You have to pick specific areas that are going to be your area of concentration. So suppose that you're looking at strategic management. And now, as we see, that once you look under the cover of strategic management, under the hood, you'll see that there are, within there, different approaches. Mintzberg's anti-design school, Porter's 5 forces, Barney's resource-based theories, and even more. So as a field develops and more people enter in with their own ideas, you'll find that the potential streams of literature multiply exponentially, because now you have more different ideas coming from different perspectives. Okay? So rather than follow everything, you got to narrow it down to what you want to really study. So suppose you chose Michael Porter and his theories, and he introduced various ideas and frameworks and theories, so you'd have to narrow it down. Suppose you decided to work with strategic groups. which is the idea that within an industry you don't compete against everybody, you compete against companies, businesses that tend to do things the same way and appeal to the same markets as you do. But even that might be too broad, depending on what you found as you looked at the literature. So you might decide that you're going to work within emerging markets. And even there, that might seem too broad, since emerging markets exist in different parts of the world, and finally you might settle on Africa. So you'd be breaking down Michael Porter's theory of competition and looking at strategic groups within emerging markets in Africa. At this point, you might have over-narrowed it, or you might find that there's a good body of literature and theories in this area that you could work with, and you could actually add something to this particular niche that you've found. So can you use anything for a dissertation topic? No, that's the idea. Either things can be too big or too small. They don't fit, there's no theory behind them, and that would be the problem with doing a dissertation on latte sizes, unless you went at it from a marketing standpoint and public perception of value, but latte sizes themselves would not constitute a particular theory. In the same way that a dissertation on Baywatch probably would not be acceptable, even in the Department of Marine Biology. After all, what would Baywatch contribute to the study of animals in the ocean? So what we try to do as advisors and what we try to do in our classes is steer you towards literature that fits a definition of being supported by theory, well established, and something that you could actually find enough background and foundation in that you would be able to add something to it. So the keys to success in working with the literature for this week, what you should be doing is looking for similarities and differences in the theories. You should be trying to find the underlying DNA. I don't need to hear a description of what the theory is per se, except as it connects to something else. You're trying to connect the dots of all these different pieces of literature. There will be divergent points of view, and you should be looking for those to understand if one person says one thing, there's probably somebody else who's written something that may take a slightly different point of view on it, and then to establish, so who's right and who's wrong here? Or is that just simply raise a point for further investigation? So there's a lot of reading involved, and you've got to schedule your time to make sure you have time to do the reading and do the investigation in the library. If you're only coming up with 2 or 3 additional sources, that will not cut it for writing a paper. I mean, you've got to be well versed in literature, and what we're doing in these classes is trying to give you a testing or a approach and testing you on your ability to do it. So if you're not doing it or not trying to do it, obviously you're failing the test of being able to do literature searches. You got to learn how to do it, and it takes time. Don't be afraid to use sources that you've already found from previous weeks. This is a continuing process. When we look at the evolution of a particular stream of literature, the earlier literature can be as relevant as the later literature to establish the links, to make the connections between them. So don't be afraid to refer to something that you've already written. Obviously don't cut and paste the words, but you can certainly use a reference from a previous week. So the good news is we're past the halfway point. You finished your comp exams, and we're aiming towards the goal line. So, until next time, keep your spirits up, and goodbye and good luck.